Greetings, everyone, and welcome back to another installment of the Healing Brothers Presents. It's time to deal with the pain. I'm one of your co-hosts, Brandon Jones, and I'm with the legendary Sam Simmons. How are you doing today, Sam?
I'm fine. I'm still, after all these years, I'm still trying to get a hold of this legendary crap. But you know,
You are a legend. When people bring up your name, it sends off a reaction to folks who've been graced by your presence. That's legendary status. It's not a oh him, and then they move on. It's like, oh Sam. That's a different type of response.
yeah. Well, I don't know nothing about that. It's like being, it's like being at a funeral, right?
Mhm.
You get people say whatever they're gonna say to your funeral, but I don't remember. Okay,
Mm,
yeah. So
mm.
I don't know. But if you say it, I mean, I've heard it before. You know, the thing that gets me is folks who don't listen, folks who are not doing a lot to change things to improve the help improve conditions for my people want
Mhm,
to quote me.
mhm,
That's the one that gets me.
mhm,
Want to quote me in a room with other black folks.
mhm.
It's like how dastardly can you be?
Right. Mhm. That just
Like,
means
huh?
that your words hold weight, man. They influence, they motivate, they get people to think about things differently, which is part of the goal.
Yeah, but if you're quoting me and you still doing the dumb shit, I have a problem with that. No, that's not a benefit.
Well, people quote the Bible and do dumb stuff too, Sam. So, it is what it is.
Oh my God. Okay. Then let me stop on this. How are you doing? Let me move past that.
I'm doing all right, man. I just returned from the Great Wolf Lodge. It's the start of spring break in my household, so I took my daughter, me and my wife took our kids to the Great Wolf Lodge and did the indoor pool thing, which was actually pretty good.
The Great
Um,
Wolf Lodge. What is
the
that?
great it used to be called the Water Park of America, but it got the name changed over. It's just right by the Mall of America, just the indoor water park hotel. It's a
Oh,
nice little.
that one
Yep, yeah.
out here by me.
Yep. Yep. So yeah, it was cool. It was cool. They had fun. They enjoyed themselves. I spent way too much money, but it was what we needed as a family. So we took time together.
Well, then it's not way too much money, my brother.
It is when it's all coming out of my pocket. But that's a whole nother story. It's a whole nother
Way
story.
too much money out of your pocket.
Yeah. Out of my
Oh,
pocket.
okay.
Yeah. 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 But I
Okay.
can't complain because people keep telling me like I better enjoy these years of these young girls because when they hit teenage years, that's when it just goes like off the rails. And I'm like, if it can get any worse than what it is now, I'm terrified. So, and I only got like 3 years before preteen kicks in. So yeah, it's about to get crazy.
Well, get terrified then. If
Yeah,
you already
I
terrified, I mean,
am. Yeah,
shoot.
it's yeah. Everyone that I know who has girls, they're like, you better enjoy these years because once they get like 13, like that's when the challenge really starts with little girls. So I was like, okay, we'll see what happens. And I already know what it's gonna be like. I can foresee a lot of it already. So, but that's neither here nor there. My goal is that none of my children get to the topic that we're going to cover today. Unfortunately, as we continue to process and move through 2022, and we're seeing how all the disparities seem to be getting wider. All the other issues that we have going on in the world continue to grow. And it's like the confusion and the trauma and stuff just keeps building and building and building. And one of the things that came out recently was an NPR report about more Black Americans are now dying from drug overdoses at a higher rate than white folks. And I sent you this article a few days ago due to you being a licensed alcohol and chemical dependency counselor to just say, hey, did you see this? And we know, and you know this, and you taught me a lot about the LADC world just in general, is that we might not die from the overdoses, but that doesn't mean that we don't have them, and and that people aren't using drugs, but it's the type of drugs that are being used, it's the types of treatments that are being utilized, and it's how people are cracking down. So there's a lot that goes into this conversation, but finally we've hit a peak over white folks, and it'd be interesting to just get your perspective on this. Um, on this article. But before we play the audio clip of the article, any initial thoughts when it comes to just overdose and chemical dependency and just drug use in the Black community?
The thing is when we say opioids, a lot of folks in our community don't know that heroin is also opioids, right? Because in the late late 60s, early 70s, middle 70s is around in there is when we had a major issue with heroin use in our community, right? Vietnam vets coming back from the army, addicted to heroin, that kind of stuff, and we know the response to that was little or none from the system. Basically, that would have been around those eras of the so-called drug war, or just say no, and little or no investment in the community. Lack of treatment, if there was any treatment. Folks died, but it really connected a lot with Black men. And there was some Black women, but the thing is heroin is an opioid, and so when you use the term opioid in our parts of our community, a lot of us don't know that what we're talking about, right? Because opioids has always been attached to pain medications for a long time, and we'll have a longer conversation about that after we show this clip. Let me bring it up.
All right, so folks, this clip is from NPR, National Public Radio, and this is Black Americans are dying from drug overdose at a higher rate than whites. Here's the clip.
Hey NPR, The Indicator is a little show about big ideas from the people who make Planet Money. For a quick hit of insight into work, the economy, and everything else, click the play button below to listen to a recent episode. Support for NPR comes from USA Facts, analyzing government data so everyone can see our nation in numbers. More at usafacts.org.
Drug deaths among Black Americans continue to surge. For the first time since the opioid epidemic began, the rate of drug overdose deaths for African Americans is higher than among whites. That's according to a new study published today in the journal JAMA Psychiatry. NPR addiction correspondent Brian Mann reports.
As recently as 2010, drug deaths among Black Americans per capita were about half the rate of white Americans. But as the opioid crisis kept exploding, a deadly trend emerged. The drug death rate among Black Americans accelerated, catching up, and now exceeding that among whites.
I do think that people are starting to realize the magnitude of this problem.
Joseph Friedman, an addiction researcher at UCLA, looked at drug death data from 1999 through 2020 and says the biggest factor killing more Black people with substance use disorder is fentanyl.
The street drug supply is becoming very, very toxic.
Because of fentanyl, drug use is more deadly for all Americans. But this new study suggests Black Americans who struggle with addiction often have even riskier sources of street drugs. That's according to Dr. Helena Hansen, a researcher at UCLA and co-author of this study.
People who are lower down on the social hierarchy tend to be exposed to fentanyl and other highly potent synthetic opioids at disproportionate rates. So you find Black Americans are exposed to fentanyl more often than white Americans.
Hansen notes Black Americans with substance use disorder also frequently lack access to health care and drug treatment. They're arrested and incarcerated at far higher rates, which means they have fewer chances to get healthy and avoid deadly relapses. This research follows a study published last month that forecast more than 1.2 million additional drug overdose deaths in the U.S. in the coming decade. Dr. Stephen Taylor with the American Society of Addiction Medicine says the data suggests his community will bear the brunt of the next phase of the opioid epidemic.
I'm terrified of that prospect. A larger percentage of this next million will be Black and other people of color.
These researchers agree the best way to prevent many of those deaths in the Black community is better health care and more access to addiction treatment. Brian Mann, NPR News.
And now...
Okay, so that is the article. They gave us the audio version, which is nice of the NPR being ADA compliant. Love it, love it. So a lot was shared in that 2 minutes. Some things that were eyebrow raises for myself. Some things that I think we've known if you've been in this field and you've done similar work, and then some things that I would give a little pushback on as well. But I want to get your initial reactions first.
Oh, I mean, my initial reaction and wasn't surprised at all.
Right.
You know, I mean, in 2016 here in Minnesota, there was a number saying that there were more overdoses amongst white individuals, right? Higher overdose number.
Mhm.
But there was in some cases more black folks dying from them same overdoses than white folks. They were using opioids less, but they were dying at a higher rate. And that information, I only found out that information by accident by a young researcher who just kind of threw it out there all out willy-nilly, and I says, where is this information at? And why don't we know about this? Oh, it's on the website in the state. I said, and again, why don't we know this? Right? I mean, she just threw it out there all willy nilly and that kind of stuff. And what we did is we started digging further and taking a look at that. That was, like I said, in 2016. And so the question was, why were more folks who were having overdose actually dying from the overdose in the Black community? And part of it is at the time, naloxone, which is one of those medications that can, if people get to you soon enough, you can come out of the overdose. Right. And that medication wasn't, there wasn't a lot of access to that medication or medications like it in the community. Secondly, I know over the last several weeks, we've been talking about the relationship between the Black community and the police departments, right? And when we say the Black community and police departments, that also means the Black community and the emergency services as well.
Exactly.
The relationship is bad. So there is, and I should have looked it up, but there's a name for a clause that if me and you were using drugs and you have an overdose, I could call the emergency room, and there's a clause in there that I will not get charged, if I stay there with you, right? But there's some actual ties in there, like if I supplied you with the drugs, if they could prove, and so Black folks what they would do is they would run and let the person die, right? And it wasn't just Black folks; it was other communities who had bad relationships with the system, right?
We just seen this out in Kansas. There was a young Black woman who OD'd. She was with a white dude. She died, but the narrative in the community was the white dude killed her. No, he supplied her with the drugs. They had sexual relations. She ended up dying, unfortunately, overdosing.
Right.
Yeah. It's crazy.
But the point I'm saying is, if you have this again, I got to look that up. But there's a term for it for the law. But this whole idea of the relationship. So there's an opportunity for me to save your life, but I'm scared to deal with the police, right? So I leave. And we have a personal experience with that in terms of one of our colleagues where the kids left. They called the police, but they left the scene, left the child by himself, and then they called the police. And when they got there, it was too late. The child was in a coma for like a week or so, and and finally passed. Right, and it's known if they would have got to this child sooner, they would have got through the overdose. Right. So that's one of the pieces that was there. Now we're talking about 2016. We're 2022. Right. So we were already on this track around that. And the other piece is fentanyl. They believe fentanyl was one of the reasons that Prince died. And you know, in terms of the opioids he was using, they think, you know, one of the opioids that took his life involved fentanyl. And then fentanyl was back in, you know, when we talk about Michael Jackson, that was one of those kind of medications. I don't know if exactly it was fentanyl, but them kind of a high acting opioid that puts you to sleep, like for surgery and those kind of things that you don't have on the street. And now we have this fentanyl that's made in Mexico that is that lace any of the opioids that we have going on, right? And so yeah, so this is not surprising at all, the relationship we got. And then let's even go back even further. And when we talk about opioid use, and when we started having this conversation nationally about opioid use, it was around painkillers, right? We already know the gangsters that got away with that, you know, killing all these folks, and you know, they had to give up some money, but they never got, you know, they never did no time and that kind of stuff, because I used to work in chronic pain, and the peddlers of pain medication says, look, this will help you with your pain. It's not addictive. And they would have people come around, give away mugs, give away free pens, take you out to lunch. And all, oh man, it was good. You know, they bring buku lunch for these little seminars with doctors, you know, and they had folks, ex-models, and both male and females come in, good-looking people come in and, you know, shuck and jive with you. They get these doctors to prescribe this medication for pain, right? Yeah. But even then, we have the discrimination where they would prescribe these medications to their white patients at a higher level than their black patients, because they always accuse black patients of being drug addicts. And, you know, there used to be studies to try to prove that black folks can handle more pain than white folks, so they don't need opioids or pain medication like white folks need pain medication. You know, think about that. We cause you a lot of both physical and emotional pain, then we get to dictate how much you can handle. Because we didn't crumble like you think you would have if you had to deal with what we had to deal with. And then we make that decision on how we're going to treat you.
And that was in the 90s. I mean, in today's world, popping pills is like a recreational activity for many black folks. You know, one of the more popular songs of late is a song by Kodak Black called Super Gremlin. And in the song, he has a lyric. He says, I popped a perk even though it was fake because I'm a super gremlin. So he was taking fentanyl. He know that the pill he was taking was not, you know, 100% what he thought it was, and didn't care. And I think that mentality is why we're seeing this spike in black folks who are overdosing. Is the drugs are bad, but also we're creating culture around taking pills as an okay thing to do. I mean, Future had a song a few years ago. Molly Perkins said "Mask Off." That song was on the radio consistently. So it's in the language. It's in the meme, the thing that gets folks' minds wrapped around it as well.
Yeah. I mean, and then, you know, the thing is that like in the news feed, they were talking about the issue around the access to treatment was a problem, and then, you know, the fact that more of the drug on the street is laced with fentanyl was a big issue in terms of the drug use in the black community, or the contributed to the high death rate of black folks of overdose, right? And treatment has always been an issue in the black community for various reasons. One, you know, funding in terms of how they're funded. You know, I mean, unless you are getting your treatment through your insurance, most treatment is funded through grants, through foundations and those kind of things. And we did learn at least a little bit of a thing early in the process, that treatment. You might need different treatment approaches for different people, and different treatment approaches for different cultures, right? And so, at least here in Minnesota, we have what we call supposedly culturally specific treatment approaches here in Minnesota. And you go to larger cities like Chicago, Baltimore, have a large Black population. Culturally, or even Detroit, culturally specific treatment approaches they don't even call it culture specific, because they have such a large population that people of color actually own their treatment centers.
Wow.
And if you talk to a lot of those folks, as I have, it takes a lot of resources in terms of dealing with treatment when we're talking about folks who are struggling in many aspects of their life, right? Because historically in our community, drug use, alcohol use have been used to medicate one's emotional pain, right? And to take the edge off, right? The edge of my daily life, the edge of dealing with white folks, the edge of this, the struggle, as people would want to call it, right? And so if you're just trying to take the edge off, I mean, again, drugs, alcohol, and then there's other ways folks use to take the edge off that if done erratically will cause you problems in your life. And one of the things that was missing early, we're doing more of it now, I believe. I don't practice as I did in the past. I would do more consulting. But the thing is we're at least recognizing more. I can't say how much we're doing, but we're recognizing more the relationship between trauma, particularly racial trauma, and drug use, right? Addressing some of that trauma. And again, when I say resource intensive for a lot of programs that deal primarily with the African American community and primarily what we would call the not the middle class, but the lower middle class or whatever. I hate all these titles. It becomes intensive because so you want me to stop using, but so when I stop using, I got to deal with clarity that I'm almost homeless if I'm not homeless. I don't have enough money or whatever to take care of my own family, right? I've done time and now nobody want to give me a job or let me even try to get a job. So you got all, and then on top of that, the last one that we just start talking about is the trauma. I got all this traumatic stuff that I've been trying to numb, with this use all this time, and I got to face all of that without support. And you want me to give up this,
right?
And so that's why that becomes resource intensive in terms of really helping people get clean when you got all these other things going on in their life, right? And that means it takes more funds, it takes more volunteers, it takes more people, and we haven't had enough people to do the work in the area of treatment to start with, right? And so, that's one of the reasons why in the Black community, they came up with these peer supports, right? People who have went through treatment, hopefully done enough to be able to support another person who hasn't been in treatment yet. So, but you said you had your thoughts about all this. I like to hear that since you're smarter than me.
Yeah, I found the article very timely. I'm not going to say I'm smarter than you. I found the article very timely that when the narrative took off that Joe Biden's administration was pumping, crack pipes throughout many urban communities, that this article comes right behind it to hide, because what the narrative was that the Biden administration was doing, putting out the crack pipes in the name of racial equity, and now we have this study to back up, well, blacks are dying at a higher rate, and they highlight in this article the biggest factor leading to the overdose deaths amongst black people is more toxic illicit drug supply. So there's more fentanyl in the opioid drugs that are being pumped through the urban communities. Now, this is not a new finding. For folks who've been in this space, you've known this. You've known that by the time the drugs get through the rural communities into the urban communities, you're getting the baddest batches out there. And we've had a lot of overdoses, and that's why you get the what's the drug that they utilize to combat it? They shoot it in your thigh. Suboxone.
Right.
So you get the Suboxone treatments. That's why a lot of that is concentrated in urban centers, because there's a lot of folks who are going into having overdoses and going into these seizure-like states a lot of times from these overdoses, and it's happening all over metropolitan areas. Unfortunately, go ahead.
Well, that Suboxone, you got to understand though, that wasn't always available to the black community though.
Correct.
That just became more available over the last
like 4 years,
2 or 3 years, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because again, when we go back to 2016, it wasn't available at the same rate it was in other communities. And then the thing is you had to go through certain people to get it, right? It wasn't that easily accessible to start with. But the thing is you're talking about the rural communities. The rural communities started out with the pain medications where they had these places. But once you get past the pain medication, you can't get the pain medications. The drugs you get off the street is the same for everybody. It's all of it is laced right now if you're getting it off the street, right? So the thing is how do you how do you increase treatment? What does treatment look like? And how do you get to a space where we can have less people find using drugs as a way out or using drugs as a way to have fun? Okay. And especially when they know that you're taking a chance. But people, there's that excitement factor, right? I know with your generation, as your generation got older, they would, say stuff like crack is whack. So it's like, think about using crack was like, oh man, that.
Yeah, nobody was down with that.
Nobody's down with that because a lot of them suffered when they were kids behind that drug, right? But then, you get into, you bring up certain things, I'm not a opponent to blaming rap lyrics, right, of things, because rap lyrics is only as effective as what's going on in the community, as far as I'm concerned, because not everybody's affected by rap lyrics the same, more so depending on what the environment and what they're exposed to has a bigger effect on them, right? In terms of connecting dots to that kind of behavior. But again, one of the reasons I stopped probably doing practicing around chemical dependency was at the time the lack of trauma informed, culturally specific or culturally sensitive trauma informed work, right? How do I help you redevelop your ideal of your life and what's successful in your life, right? How do I allow you to be able to, where do I give you permission to give yourself forgiveness for some of the things you've done in your past? We've talked about this, that in parts of our community, even though we are we at times claim to be a highly faith-driven community, the issue of forgiveness is a major issue in our community. And there's still parts of our community that says, not literally just not recently, a black person said, well, you know, some people just ain't strong enough. You know, in terms of, if you strong enough, you won't get into this. Well,
right.
You know, so you're not offering people any grace,
any opportunity. Yeah.
Right, you know what I'm saying? So yeah, we need more funding and more treatment, but it also talks about what you're going to do in treatment, right? How you're going to address treatment. How do you, even when you have folks who are supporting other people, like these support peers, are you doing enough with the support peers to deal with their trauma so that their trauma don't get restarted by working with other folks who are actively using drugs? And that's been a problem too, that we don't talk about, that's under the cover, right? With the support peers, are we giving the support peers enough support to maintain their sobriety? You know, I've dealt with organizations where that has happened, right? Because we haven't done, and in some of the ones that are really more active, like out east, they have come to recognize that. Right, they got to do even though this person, you know, is on the road of recovery, and you know, and they done did, you know, successfully went through treatment, they need continued support to kind of look at life differently around their drug use. What is contributing to their drug use, right? What is contributing to their drug use to the point of that becomes such a driver. And again, I'm not ignoring addiction, right? Being addicted physically, emotionally around around drugs and that kind of thing, and opioids, because it's highly addictive. But the issue is I'm seeing some of the same patterns that was carried out when we ended up dealing with crack cocaine, right? In the beginning parts of opioids, because it was identified as poor whites or white community, we had compassion. Now we're getting ready to go down that non-compassionate road again, now that we have this, you know, the higher use of African Americans. Because I know in the article that went around with the NPR soundbite was talking about the use of criminal justice to deal with communities of color, and specifically black folks, right? We would rather lock you up than send you to treatment. Because one of the things is, the other piece is if you ignore me long enough, right, and you ignore my initial problem with with this drugs, with my trauma, not feeling like I have any outlets and that kind of stuff, I am going to commit some crimes that look like I should go to jail, right? That don't take much when we talk about the black community in the response to us, right?
Yeah.
So we're starting to see that what was started out with opioids, with the compassion and the understanding and how we're going to save our babies and all this other kind of stuff, because it becomes more and more about black folks and brown folks use and that kind of stuff. It goes shift the other way.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, and in the article, that's exactly where they ended it at. They said what the person that they had interviewed or asked about the dynamic that's going on in the community, they had said that, you know, as a member of the black community and as a addiction treatment specialist, I'm terrified of that prospect. But that's exactly what we could be facing, Taylor says. A large percentage of this next million deaths will be black and other people of color. And you say this all the time, when you mean black, say black. Like don't try to add on everybody else, because the article says black folks have finally, you know, surpassed white folks when it comes to addiction. So just like, I don't know why we struggle with this, man. Like, we always want to just like do. I have theories to why. My conspiracy.
Yeah, well, you've been saying you have theories to a bunch of stuff, and I ain't hearing none.
Well, I ain't got time. I ain't got time to go.
No, wait a minute.
But okay, here's my theory.
Some theories about this whole issue with the opioids, and maybe you already talked about them. But what is this theory to this thing about you know, being
using black and
unable
not
to
using
say
black.
black when you mean
Well,
black.
because I think that the social engineers of our society are trying to get away from racial categories, and they're trying to make us have a more collective identity around people of color. And that's why we're using terms like BIPOC, and when we have these add-ons of other people of color, no one ever specifies what that means. So it's just everybody. If you're non-white, you're other people of color. That's my theory around that. And I think that folks have been talking about this forever. The tanning of America, 2050. By 2050, we're going to be overwhelmingly Latino, Latina, and Latinx, whatever form you want to utilize. And people have been saying things like we're going to have, this huge conglomerate of beige people. Like this is what's been talked about. And those people need an identifier, and that identifier is going to be people of color. That's my thought process. Black has gotten to a point where it is counterproductive. I mean, we've even seen how racism itself has caused $16 trillion of damage with racial biases. There's an economist that found that out in 2020. So we're at a point now, and this is why we're getting these pushes through all these different social service and corporate and educational institutions that are trying to be diverse, have diversity, equity, inclusion, because they're trying to get folks to be convinced, like, look, yeah, we're going to have white folks, and that might not change, but we also need to understand that this is a new group of people of color, and we're trying to get to that. So that's my theory. That's what I think's happening. So we're seeing the promotion of a lot more interracial relationships. You're starting to see a lot more multiracial and biracial people represented all across things that are in front of you, is because they're gearing people up. Really, they're gearing white folks up to be more tolerant and acceptant of quote unquote BIPOC people. That's my theory.
Okay.
I told you, you don't want to get into it.
Well, I mean, the thing is I hear what you're saying, and some of what you're saying, you can see it right there on TV, right there in front of you, and that kind of stuff. But I also think the issue around not being able to say black when you mean black is it's uncomfortable.
Yeah, the history.
The history. Yeah. See, the thing is America's great at wanting to not deal with what's uncomfortable. They want the other thing is they want us to just move on.
Yep.
Right. But you haven't finished fully dealing with the issue around race. Race was built around blackness.
Yep.
Here in America. So that we could good-natured white folks could be okay with what was going on to black people.
Okay? And whiteness was created for kind of the other side of that coin, so that white folks would stop beating up on each other and see each other as one, and stop dividing beyond ethnicities and religion.
Right. So because I mean, think about it. If you look at the history of race, especially racism here in America, we got racism going on across the country. We don't even want to get. There's some stuff we can get into around that as well, because it's just been that way. But in America, how many ways they doubled down on the issue of black racism, right? Because every time black folks came up with some way to let them know we're not as dumb as you want to tell your white counterparts, they would double down. You can look at the legal pieces in America, the early legal pieces, when you had the black woman who was a slave, whose kids were with a white man. She said, "Look, you saying that the race runs through the male? My babies are free," and she won the case, right? So they just doubled down, right? And again, if you double down enough, the average white person or the average person who ain't black will look at, okay, so we're gonna double down that they're less intelligent, and they need our safety and all like that, and also make it okay even religiously to double down on that, right? Because people, as much as some folks want to say, everybody got some kind of conscience, but if I can play games with my consciousness, I can go on with my life and say, well, has nothing to do with me, or they did say, because we still do that, right? It's like if something happens to a black person before George Floyd, well, they should have just did what the police said. Now, this might be the same person that the last time they got stopped by a policeman for a ticket, got out and started cussing them out and talking about, don't you have a real job and aren't you dealing with real criminals? I used to be with white folks who would do that shit. And I would sit back and like, woo, and then watch like, nothing happened to them. Jump out the car. Don't you got something else better to do than to harass tax-paying people? I pay your
salary.
And I wish I would do some craziness like that. Too.
Yeah.
But again, they shouldn't have really done that, but you do know. See, as long as you can give people that emotional out to this bypass, the same thing they used to do with men and women. Yeah. But you knew what she had on, right? You know how she was dressed, right? To give your conscience a break from the brutality that was occurring, right? So, but again, like you said, with this particular article, they're talking about Black Americans with overdose, but we keep talking about people of color, right?
Right. But really, it's just Black, and we just gotta stop. We gotta tell the truth and stop trying to throw everybody else in there, because we're not seeing our Asian counterparts. Some of them do have opioid issues. That is true, but it's not a part of what they're talking about when they say Black and brown folks. They just call it. The research says what it is clearly, but when we talk about it, we want to throw colorful language. I'll say that. How about that?
Well, they call it inclusive language.
Yes.
But they don't want to be inclusive when it comes to them.
Let's talk a little bit about. That's very true. I want to shift gears while we got a few minutes left to talk a little bit about fentanyl. What do you know about fentanyl? How did this become a part of the synthetic form of heroin, and why is it used so much? And are black people even care about fentanyl? Do we know about it? Are we excited about it? I've heard us call it Fenty.
Huh?
I've heard black folks calling it Fenty. I was like, we don't need to be giving this a cute name. This is a dangerous substance.
Well, but fentanyl was, again, the little bit I do know. I'm not going to about fentanyl was one of a higher level of opioid that was used for a sedative to put people asleep for surgery. It's on that same level, right? So it was always highly just more powerful, right? And not being used outside of a hospital, really, right? Like I said, the drug that Michael Jackson was using, I don't think it was exactly fentanyl, but it was on that same level for him to sleep. That's supposed to be done and used by a physician, anesthesiologist, right? And the thing is, it has a bigger hit. So if I'm in the drug business and I done found a way to make it right and it becomes cheaper, hey, we got to make it bigger hit. It's like back in the heroin days, right? You could have heroin get on the street and have a name, because back in the day, certain drug dealers used to put names on their packages so people knew it was their product. Just like, we want you to know it's not Pepsi or Coke. We want to, you know what I'm saying, in terms of like, putting that name on it.
Yeah. Yeah, they were branding experts.
Yeah, and we would have heroin on the street that was causing overdoses by the truckload, and people knew it, and their sales would go up.
Yeah. And which, I mean, that's a whole other show.
Was laced with something extra to it. Give it that pop. And again, it ain't,
I heard something. I want to run something by you. I've heard this from another gentleman who he's close to your age. He lives in New York. He does YouTube content and stuff. And he used to do crack. He used to do crack. So sometimes he jokes and he talks about it. And he said there's a thing with people who use drugs that when overdoses are reported, a lot of times people go looking for that drug that person took because it was so deadly or so dangerous, almost took somebody out. That's the drug they want.
Right.
Is that something? Have you heard that before?
What I'm saying.
Oh, damn. Okay. I thought he was just joking, but it's always stuck in the back of my head since he said it. It's like that people wanted it even more when they heard somebody overdosed on it.
Yeah. I mean, It's like, what is, oh man, it's like, man, it's like, what was it? The movie, they kind of talked about it a little bit. The one with Denzel in it, when they was doing the docudrama on the drug lord that
Training Day.
No, not Training Day. The one oh god, because a friend of mine grew up
American Gangster.
Yeah, a friend of mine grew up in New Jersey with that dude.
Yeah,
right. I mean, that dude was very popular in the hood.
Frank White.
Yeah, and they talk about it in there. But again, in the long run, it was bad for business. In the short run, some cats didn't care. In the short runs, it was great for business.
Wow.
But in the long run, it's bad for business because now you got more heat on you from the feds and stuff, because more people are dying than usual. Right. But yeah, the folks out there, and then again, people will say, well, it's about addiction and all this other kind of stuff. And it absolutely is. But the other piece is that people have known, he was right. Let's put it that way.
Wow. And then we have different factions of fentanyl. You got car fentanyl that's supposed to be even more dangerous. And that type of fentanyl or strand of opioid was used to take down like elephants and bears.
Oh yeah.
It's like, yeah, man. I mean, this stuff is dangerous, man. And people are like looking for it to get high.
Hey man, and that's not, and again, that's not even just a thing for black folks. It's for folks,
Yeah.
I mean, it ain't the same, but think about those folks who were using animal tranquilizer instead of getting the damn vaccine.
Now let's be careful because we start talking about that, they're gonna cancel us like Joe Rogan. We gotta get canceled before we get started. All right, so
man, I've been canceled before. I ain't calling nobody no names, and I'm not faking using the N-word when I know that I use it to get ratings. I'm not doing none of that kind of stuff, Act like I didn't know. It's like, please. Speaking of trust, what this is off the mark. Did you hear about Hennepin County?
Doing what now? It depends on what it is.
No, the Hennepin County around the disparities and around the diversity, where you got staff running around with blackface, tearing down Black Lives Matter posters off of black staff's walls and in their offices and that kind of stuff, man.
No, please update me. What's been going on?
Oh no, I'll send you the article. It's not, but again, the big piece for me is that's Hennepin County.
Mm-hmm.
That's where folks, if you ain't got no money or no health care, that's one place you're supposed to be able to go, right, and get help, right. And so you want to go someplace you think gonna treat you well. At least treat you like a human being. And if we're having these kind of issues with staff,
right, what's the expectation beyond that?
And they see a lot of folks of color, right? And so I've done some work with them for a little while. And it was there. Some of the staff is like, and then there's the nurses was scared. They didn't want to deal with some of the the kids who were black kids are getting shot, and I mean, and they brought some folks in to try to deal with that, and the point is they brought these folks in to deal with that, and then all this other stuff came out recently within the last week or so.
Wow.
Because I know they brought folks in to deal with that, right? And so this and they're not the only ones dealing with that kind of stuff. It's so entrenched, and then the people you bring in to run the joint, right? Are they real? Do they really want to really address this kind of stuff,
right?
Or this, it's like how do you deal with this in a large organization that especially in Hennepin County, which deals with a lot of people. We're gonna use the term people of color because it is people of color at Hennepin County, right? And you're dealing with all these folks, and you got this craziness going on.
Yep.
Right. Then you got all these, outer ring suburbs whose kids done got permission by, we know who done gave them permission over the last several years to be calling students nigga in public. Like at basketball games and girl basketball games, boy basketball games. And it always tickles me to death is when it comes up, the principal always say, we don't condone this behavior and all that. And if you talk to black kids who are going to those schools, it's like this stuff been going on for a minute. But we don't condone. So how do you not know this?
Because they don't care. It's like,
or you got the situation.
But how do you? So the issue is then they don't know how to. They don't know how to enforce it, because if they start enforcing on the white kids, they got to enforce on the black kids too, who are sent nigga up and down the hallways all the time. And then guess what's gonna happen? A disparity, and then they're gonna be called racist. So it's like you're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't.
See. I'm gonna let you out on the limb on that one, man.
I'll be on the limb. I don't think
I'm gonna cut out. I'm gonna leave you out the limb, and I'm gonna cut the limb off with the little saw. I'm gonna leave you a little stem so you get a warning. No, I hear you. And on top of that, you got at one of the schools where the young black girls was being called nigga or whatever, one of their classmates or teammates.
It was on Snapchat. Yep.
Mm-hmm. And reported to the coach, but the girl is the coach's daughter.
Mm-hmm.
And then the coach talking about, well, why don't we just keep this between us and that kind of thing move. And not make it such a big deal.
Yep, the wrong move.
And wanted her to sign some kind of piece of paper, and the girl took a picture of the paper she put in front of her, and now the coach done resigned, and again, we don't condone this kind of behavior.
Yeah.
Really.
Yeah.
Yeah, and think about that. You want the little chocolate children on your team so you can win, but you have no respect for them as humans.
Yeah.
Think about how often that goes on.
It happens all the time on all levels of athletics.
Right.
And I would just say in all levels of just institutions, period. I mean, we need to make quotas when it comes to education and jobs and stuff like that. Like that, at the end of the day, there's a lot of work that needs to be done, period.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of work that needs to be done, but we both external and internal, we might need to start looking at some other kind of ways to get some outcomes differently, because some of us want all this to change overnight to get outcomes. Mm-hmm. and that's not happening. So there might be some other approaches that we might need, but it's time to go. So it
is time to go.
You done got us all off the mark and stuff.
I'll take the blame. But I will say this to wrap us up. When it comes to the opioid crisis, it's unfortunate that Black Americans have crossed this path of having higher rates of overdoses than whites. It's unfortunate, with anyone having overdoses with opioids, but for us to only be 13% of the population and exceeding the overdoses, that's pretty sad, man. It really goes to where we are as far as the trauma and what we're utilizing to cope with. And just to connect back to a point you had mentioned earlier, to me, the entertainment value and what is happening in the actual community, it's a parallel. They feed off of each other. And the music and the entertainment really is just telling a narrative in the community, but it's also influencing the community to keep doing things. And I know places like the Twin Cities, where we typically are late to get onto cultural things. And when something blows up or becomes popular, whether it's slang, clothing, materials that people are consuming, we'll do it because X person did it. And I know in places like Atlanta, where they were already popping pills, that looks like fun culture. So of course, the influence folks here are going to do the same things like popping pills. So we have to be very mindful of how these things interplay, and we have to be able to see things from a full circle instead of just, this is one way or the other. So I will close out on that. If you do have folks in your family who are struggling with addiction, please try to get them the appropriate help as best as possible. Encourage them to the best you can, because addiction, opioid addiction can be very fatal very quickly. So any final thoughts from you, Sam, as we close out?
No, we good. We're good. We'll be back next week. Everybody stay safe.
Thank you.